In 5th place, we have flying monkeys. Yep, you heard me right. While The Wizard of Oz might be one of my all-time favorite films, heck, I've even cosplayed Dorothy alongside my childhood Toto plush, it took me a while to wrap my head around this sighting. Darla of Jacksonville, Florida, experienced this event in May of 2017 that left her completely bewildered. She was driving on a neighborhood street and a strange animal was on the roadway. She could see its head and it looked kind of like a monkey, but it was smaller, similar in size to a prairie dog or a gopher. She found herself repeating, "What on earth is that?" to her friend that was in the car with her as she drove around it, seeing as it wasn't moving and was possibly dazed by the headlights on her vehicle. I'm hoping she didn't have her high beams on because they fry out my eyes, so I don't want to imagine what it would do to a little critter. Her friend thought it was like a possum at first, until they passed it and agreed that it definitely didn't resemble a possum, but they still couldn't come to a consensus on what it was. Darla turned the vehicle around and all she could see were wings that seemed way too large for the size of what she had seen flying away. Now the logical part of her brain took over and deemed whatever the heck it was too big to be an owl, so maybe it was snatched up in the sky by an owl? At this point we've named off every similar creature in the same size range. Darla pulled over to mentally dissect what she had just seen to try and make sense of it. It was a being that was kinda on the smaller size, with a head, a neck, the ability to stand solidly on 2 legs, oh, and with extremely large wings. I was gonna say, that was almost my description. If anyone has any solid guesses, feel free to let me know in the comments. She knew that the nearby Walmart had monkeys living in the parking lot after independent owners let them escape, leaving her confused for eternity. All that comes to my brain after that description for me personally is the damn IKEA monkey, but wearing like a Wizard of Oz evil witch uniform instead of the oversized coat. I'm glad Darla managed to avoid any harm to herself or to her vehicle, but I know I'll be wondering exactly what the heck that creature would be for the rest of the night. Yeah, I got nothing. In 4th place, we had a Manal from the Philippines. I swear I do look up how to pronounce new words, but my tongue just doesn't like them on occasion, and sometimes I get led astray by false pronunciation videos. 2 young women in Talisay City are positive that they spotted this creature. The name comes from the Tagalog word tanggal, which means to remove or to separate. Oh, for those of us who aren't experts on this creature, it's a being whose upper body separates from its lower body, possesses fangs and wings that give them a vampire-like appearance, and resides exclusively in the Philippines. This creature is said to favor preying on sleeping pregnant women, using an elongated proboscis-like tongue to suck the hearts of fetuses or the life source of someone who is sleeping. Now, as usual, local police are trying desperately to cover up this spotting, but thanks to social media, that's getting harder and harder for them to do. And we all know I hate a cover-up. Our 2 witnesses went to a neighbor's house to get a Wi-Fi connection, and afterwards, while they were returning to their own home, they spotted the Manangal on top of a roof of a neighbor's house. Now, the neighbor in question sadly didn't bear witness to the majestic creature, just both women shouting and crying. Police also interviewed another neighbor, whose house is close to this first neighbor's home, and he claimed to see the same thing. You know, the girls were shouting and crying, but nothing in the sky. Seeing as we have photographic evidence though, I'll let you lovely folks out there in the interwebs form your own opinions down in the comments.
Number 3. Skinwalkers. This one is a very popular cryptid online, and you've probably heard a great deal about them before if you're a fan of this kind of thing. But the term does kind of get thrown around a lot and ends up describing all sorts of things that might not be super accurate. So let's take a look at examining some of the history of the legend and where it stems from. Skinwalkers are apparently like really viral on TikTok. I wouldn't know, I gotta be honest, I try to really limit how much time I'm on that. The Skinwalker is a creature of Navajo legend where it's referred to as a Yi Naldushi, and please forgive me if that's pronounced incorrectly. It translates to, by means of it, it goes on all fours, referring to their tendency to walk like an animal. Navajo witches and skinwalkers go against traditional Navajo values and are seen as the antithesis of their core beliefs. As well, it's worth adding, legends of skinwalkers and Navajo witches are not particularly well known or well told outside of indigenous communities, and some indigenous advocates and groups are not the biggest fan of their folklore and cultural history being made into fodder for ghost stories. Animals commonly associated with skinwalkers are coyotes, wolves, foxes, eagles, owls, or crows, but skinwalkers are said to be able to have the power to assume the form of any animal they see fit. Now, a variation of the legend surrounding the creature is that they're able to extend this ability to taking the face of a human victim, which is extremely scary. Some legends say that skinwalkers gain power from a victim's fear and that they prey on those who are afraid. And some state that looking into the eyes of one will cause your body to seize up, overtaken by the fear, where it will then attack attack you. On TikTok, as I've come to understand from some very intensive research, and definitely not just goofing off at my desk watching TikToks of cats falling down on my phone, is that skinwalkers are popularly thought to be a creature imitating humans or animals and doing a poor job of it. Which case, if that is true, the likelihood of me being a skinwalker? Sky high. Number 2, Mongolian Deathworm. Our next entry is a cryptid whose name really says it all. If you ever hear something get described as a Mongolian Deathworm, you have to figure that is probably not the friendliest form of life out there. For starters, it sounds like it would be way more at home in the dunes of Arrakis than it would be on our Earth. That one's for my Frank Herbert heads out there. The creature is also called Ogo Pogo, which translates to large intestine worm, which is, that's just lovely. Appetizing. It allegedly lives in the Gobi Desert, has been evading hunters since the 20s when it first rose to prominence. A paleontologist and author going by the name of Roy Chapman Andrew recounted a story he'd heard at a gathering with several Mongolian officials, where they all talked of the worm at great length. Now, no one among them could claim to have actually seen it, but everyone firmly believed in its existence. In this book, he describes the worm as being about 2 feet long, with no head or limbs to speak of, and has such poisonous skin that direct contact is enough to have you buying the farm. It's described as well as having a sprayable venom and an electric discharge. You should probably see a doctor for that. It burrows underground, only coming up to the surface to hunt and eat, presumably. In 1990, Czechoslovakian cryptozoologist, and wow, that's a mouthful, Ivan Mackerel led a team to try and find the creature in the Gobi Desert. This I love so much because Dune is my favorite book. They use the same technique that the Fremen of Arrakis use to try and find these worms that the Fremen used to deal with the sandworms. They used a rhythmic thumping made from a motor-driven thumper to try and summon the creature out of possible hiding spots. They never found the fabled worm, and that's because they weren't taking spice, so they couldn't see properly. So either it was just a dream, or the thing is very, very good at hiding. And I think with a little work, that could make a fun expression. Oh, it's as hard as trying to find a worm in a desert. We'll workshop it. Number 1, Gashadokuro. And our final entry is going to come from Japan, and as a fabled mythological creature, and may I just say, is one of my favorite mythical monsters I've read about in a while. As soon as I was reading about this thing, I started texting my friends. I was so excited about it. This thing is a real-life Dark Souls boss fight. Maybe I'm outing myself as way too much of a nerd here, but this thing is where the inspiration for High Lord Wolnir and Grave Lord Nito of Dark Souls fame came from. I couldn't resist throwing it out there. Sorry, guys. Formed from tens of thousands of bones of fallen soldiers, the Gashadokuro is a massive titan of a beast, a gigantic skyscraper-sized skeleton. Is that not the coolest thing you've ever heard? A giant which wanders around the countryside during the darkest hours of the night. Their teeth chatter and their bones rattle, which is why the translation for their name translates loosely to rattling skull. You'd have to imagine though, you would probably hear this thing chattering its teeth from a few hundred miles away. You'd hear it in the next town over. It's said that the Gashadokuro is born when mass amounts of soldiers die on the same battlefield. Their bodies rot in the fields, and they don't receive proper funerary rites. As such, their souls are filled with torment as their bodies lay face down in the muck, and that malice permeates their bones, causing them to twist and mend into unnatural ways, clumping together to eventually form the humongous skeletal monster of a boss fight, the Gashadokuro. Now, troublesome for humans, it's said that a Gashadokuro is too large and too powerful to be felled by ordinary weapons. Although, I have to wonder if that's still true. I feel like we put more gunpowder in things in 2023 than they did in the Sengoku period, and I'm pretty sure a bulldozer would make short work of a bunch of bones being held together with hatred. It's said that these creatures no longer show up because the amount of dead bodies in one place are not nearly as high as they once were in rural areas of Japan back then, with significantly less wars and plagues occurring, which is a sign of progress, right? You know, if there's so few piles of mass graves that they're no longer reanimating as Godzilla-sized skeleton demons, that's a real positive note for the human race, and I think something we can all smile about.
In 5th place today, we're kicking things off with the Mamy Bigfoot. For those of y'all who are unaware with the area, it's located roughly 6.5 hours north of Toronto, and it's a sweet little community. I personally grew up about 3 hours away from it, so I'm feeling pretty qualified to talk about the area today and provide some additional geographical context where needed. This tale actually begins around 20 years ago when our anonymous narrator purchased property on the lake, which is a very common cottage and vacation spot. spot. He had grown up spending summers in the area and describes himself as very knowledgeable about wildlife noises. Around 9:15 at night, right about when darkness was starting to take over, our narrator and his wife were sitting by the fire, facing the vast woods on their property, when his wife decided to go inside for the evening. Probably to avoid mosquito bites, those are brutal up there. He was staring at the fire alone when he heard what he described as 3 whacks about a kilometer away, and didn't really think about it until around 15 minutes later when he heard the sound again, but closer. Originally he assumed it was the sound of a moose hitting their antlers against a tree, but it was too early in the year for that to be a thing. Being barely able to see the tree line through the darkness, our witness heard the noise again after another 15 minutes. But, you guessed it, closer. Not having anything to arm himself with and only a pen flashlight, he fled into the cottage as the whacks came again, and even closer this time. The whacks were never heard once he was inside the house that night, but happened often at night over the next decade. Now, I know, 2023. The most recent event was just last weekend, when our witness was hosting a get-together to open the cottage for the season. It may seem early, but some northerners are really eager for cottage season, especially since they get such cold up there. All of his neighbors were present when they heard a bone-chilling scream from less than 100 yards from where they were standing, causing everyone to pause in shock and wonder what they were hearing. Soon after, the same type of scream was heard deeper in the forest, almost as if it were answering the first scream. After scouring the internet and listening to a wide variety of animal sounds, nothing matched what our witness heard. His property is water access only, which means the chances of, a random stranger pulling a prank or drunk debauchery are ruled out from possible logical reasoning. My last 2 cents on this point as a former northern girl, I've heard some weird stuff in the woods when I'd be, camping at a provincial park with my family as a kid, but nothing like that. Kinda glad now that I never really went exploring on my own. In 4th place, we have the most recent sighting of Nessie. For the uninitiated, Nessie is the preferred nickname of the Loch Ness Monster, located in Loch Ness, Scotland. Yeah, it might have been obvious to some, but I like to make sure we all know what I'm talking about. Sightings of our girl go all the way back to 565 AD, making her a grown woman at this point in time. Tied with Bigfoot for the most common cryptid being spotted, she's extremely popular, but quite the recluse at the same time. The most recent spotting is the first from this year, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to come. In early March, Nessie enthusiast Eoin O'Fedigan couldn't believe what he saw when he was monitoring a webcam video of the lake from his home. 2 separate clips captured something stirring in the mysterious depths close to shoreline lodges, near Fort Augustus on the loch's southern shore. He described that he almost couldn't believe what he was seeing, and it all happened so fast. In the first video clip, something moves on the surface for a couple of seconds, then you see 2 shadowy wakes moving in 2 lines under the surface, moving to the left around 15 feet before disappearing. Eoin estimated the wake was roughly 6 to 8 feet long, believing the water was too agitated for the disturbance to have been caused by a fish. Now, this is the first confirmed sighting of Nessie in over 7 months, breaking the drought of Nessie news. Maybe she was just hibernating? Can't say I blame her. Look at the weather some days. In 3rd place, we have a winged humanoid. I swear the entire list isn't going to be winged beings. I promise. Come on. Don't you folks trust me by now? Look at this face. I don't think I've ever led y'all wrong. Chicago-based private investigator Manuel Navarrete was hanging out with his friends in a bakery parking lot on February 5th of this year, just chatting and vibing, as one does, when the group noticed something standing on top of the flea market across the parking lot. It looked like a pitch-black, 7-foot-tall man with wings that were wider than a car and red eyes that were as bright as taillights. The creature was observing Manuel and his buddies closely, making chirping noises that the group could hear clearly from the distance they were at, which was around 50 yards away even without the height difference. Now, the group continued their staring contest with the being for almost 10 minutes before it flew straight into the air and over the group of dudes, watching them the entire time. The men fought the temptation to run, not wanting to lead the creature anywhere or trigger like a prey response. They estimate the entire encounter happened between 11 to 11:30 p.m., and it was a rather clear evening, so there was no chance of clouds warping what they saw. I'll leave you folks with something fun to ponder over. This is the 8th confirmed sighting reported in that area since 2017, and no one is positive what the heck this creature is, just that it's out there. In 2nd place, we have a Glimmer man in Chicago. See, I told y'all. No more winged whatevers. The only connection this encounter has to the last one is that they were both based out of Chicago, but in different areas of the city and took place within the last year. Other than that, no relation. Stella's experience took place on September 2nd of 2022, after a day of running errands for her elderly father, when she had returned to his apartment building and 6th floor residence. She went out on the balcony for a cigarette break, just standing and allowing her mind to go blank, when she noticed a weird large tree around 20 feet away. Yes, I'll obviously elaborate. One of the branches on the tree was bowing quite heavily, but Stella couldn't see anything on it that could be responsible for weighing it down. So as she was staring at the branch and trying to make sense of what her eyes were seeing, an intense feeling of dread and fear came over her, as if every part of her body was screaming at her to turn around and run, but she didn't know why. At this very moment, the bowing branch that she had just been observing began to shake violently, and despite her internal instincts still screaming at Stella, leave, curiosity had now gotten the better of her, and she started to move along the railing to get a closer look. As your friendly narrator, this is where I interject and tell anyone with some sense to, run! But hey, what do I know? It's not like I talk about this for a living. A small form began to glimmer on the branch, and as Stella continued to watch in shock, a transparent human figure that shimmered a yellowish-whitish color developed. Stella snapped out of her fixated stare and quickly took a step back from the railing, realizing finally that this is something that maybe should be feared. Glad the old common sense kicked in after the overwhelming fear, dread, and visual should have kicked in sooner in my opinion, but that's just my usual snark kicking in. The shimmery being eventually dropped out of the tree, landing behind a man who happened to be walking past at the time. Now the walking man spun around, his reaction similar to as if he had been hit with an object from behind, and was confused when all he saw was a cloud of smoke. Oh, by the way, the shimmery man had disappeared in the puff of smoke almost instantly after hitting the ground. Now Stella waited for some time, expecting to see this thing re-emerge from the dust or smoke, but it was completely gone. At the same time, another neighbor just a few floors below Stella and her dad had also observed exactly the same thing as her, and managed to confirm all the same details. Now the neighbor and Stella then managed to track down the man who was walking past a few hours later, and after a conversation, confirmed that he had felt the weird impact, the overwhelming dread, but didn't see anything. Stella is positive that the Glimmer Man still roams the area, often feeling the overwhelming emotions from the day whenever she visits her dad, but hasn't spotted it since. My heart goes out to her, and I hope whatever it is buggers off soon for her sake. In our first place, we have an aquatic cryptid in Vancouver. I swear ending today's video on a Knuck tale wasn't planned, but when it works, it works. Taylor Wallace is a private investigator based out of BC who was hired to find evidence of a person that's gone missing without a trace, only to find after a more than 6-year investigation evidence of large clawed creatures that could very well be eating people. The photos he has provided as proof show a large claw print in the sand that was found among others next to a headless seal that he discovered in 2016. So a large claw print cut into solid stone that was found in 2022, a cave made by something with large claws that has a red fluid soaked entrance with a red claw print on the cave wall above it, and 3 separate scat samples from a large animal, believed to be one of these creatures, one of which contains very much what looks like a human fingernail. The area these were found in was a couple hundred feet around a lake from the public beach, and there were dozens and dozens of large claw marks coming out of the water and onto shore in various places that didn't belong to any kind of water creature that he could identify. Heck, after staring at them for quite a while myself, and with the knowledge I have of, beings at this point, the only thing in my brain that they look like are velociraptor claws. And I know that's not right. Not unless these photos came from Isla Nublar without telling anyone. Now Taylor has been returning regularly to the beach in question and has gathered multitudes of more evidence each time. He sadly found another decapitated seal and copious amounts of evidence of a large aquatic creature that's coming out of the ocean on a daily basis to feed on seals, ducks, and snow geese. Not only are there large digs and claw prints in the hard ground everywhere, made by a creature with, big claws, but the remains of dead animals are all over the park. Coyotes are the largest predators in the area, and he's never seen one in that park. But the claw prints are way too big to be coyotes or even just like a large dog. These digs are much bigger than even bears or cougars, and you don't even see those in the area. Okay, not gonna visit Vancouver anytime soon. I'll stick to the natural predators here in Toronto. Oh, and crappier evidence, in that nearby park, he's collected those 3 separate scat samples that I mentioned earlier, and he's hoping that that human fingernail that he found in one of them is from the missing human that he's been looking for years, so we can stop visiting this area and seeing all this weird stuff. Now, interestingly enough, where he's found evidence of these creatures, it matches up with the locations of people who have gone missing without a trace. Alrighty folks, check up on your BC friends and warn them to not go swimming alone anytime soon, or walk in any parks. Yikes.
Number 5. Snow waset. Coming up first on our list of icy cold little critters is the snow waset, a fearsome legless little cryptid and a local one to boot, so I had to include it. Anything that comes from the greater Canada area is a big deal for me. It winters by the Great Lakes and the Hudson Bay, and in the rest of the year crawls up to Newfoundland and Labrador. Totally the wrong time of year, buddy. You gotta go to Newfoundland in the winter for Jig's dinner. Anyway, a snow waset is like a weasel. It's a long, furry creature, except it has no legs. Except in the summertime, where it does have legs and also turns green. If I was a biologist, I would love to get my hands on this thing and figure that out. That particular part of the lore of this creature is really fascinating to me. Why would a creature shed its legs like baby teeth? What cruel joke of evolution is that? It's like a mammal sandworm. Anyway, I gotta move on. When it's in its legless, winterized form, it burrows deep beneath the snow and ambushes its prey by surprise and drags them into the frozen underground. Absolutely horrifying. A frozen, legless, furry little snake is not pleasant by any definition. A waset is said to be 4 times as large as a wolverine and 40 times as hungry, requiring a vast amount of meat to keep it sustained. Doesn't shed enough calories shedding those legs. I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm so hung up about this, my ghouls, but I am. Maybe it's because there's not actually that much information about the snow waset out there. Sightings and stories about it date back mostly hundreds of years, and there haven't been too much buzz about them ever since. Perhaps they're extinct. Or perhaps they've all just burrowed under too deep where I can't see them. Either way, the only thing that really stood out for me is they turn green and have no legs, so I'm gonna keep banging on that. And hey, when it's this cold outside, what do you really need to go out for? Stay inside, order some food, turn the heat up, and keep watching Top 5 Scary for the rest of the night. And while you're there, maybe think about tossing a subscribe your way if it's not too much trouble. Number 4, the Knuck V. Coming up next on this list is the Knuck V, a cryptid that I had never heard of before researching for this video, so I hope it's new to you too and you get to learn something cool. The Knuck V is an old Nordic myth, a demon of the sea appearing as a horrifying demonic, part horse, part man, part thing hybrid. Seriously, this thing is disgusting. It looks like somebody glued a bunch of leftover horse parts and man parts together, and it's completely skinless, leaving its exposed flesh to all the elements to see. Kinda looks like one of those behind the scenes videos of how they make McDonald's chicken nuggets, you know? The Knuck V is said to be trapped in the sea during the warmer months of the year, and then come winter is set free to wreak all kinds of havoc. This thing is pure evil, destroys just by breathing. The horsey head part emits toxic fumes just by opening its wretched maw, and this vapor causes crops to wilt, people to fall ill, and drought soon follows after. I see why they keep this thing locked up for most of the year, because it kinda sounds like a royal nuisance. It's thought that the Knuck V was first created by old Nordic storytellers as a way of rationalizing and explaining away things like drought and plague destroying the harvest. It's much easier to put a face to your problems, and when that problem is a wretched flayed horseman, it's easy to get angry at that. When stories of the Knuck V were told, it was thought to be so evil that its name was always said in a hushed whisper for fears of speaking too loudly of it could attract its attention. Oh, I wish I knew that about 2 minutes ago. I just said its name like 16 times very loudly. It's said that if you're ever to encounter the dread Knuck V to find the nearest fresh body of water. This sickly creature of the sea is deathly afraid of fresh water, I guess. You'd think a creature with all that skin exposed wouldn't like salt water or the cold, but hey, there you go, to each their own. You do you, terrifying skinless monster horseman.
In 3rd place, time to talk about fairies. Now, while I like to think of them like helpful beings with multicolored hair and stunning wings, sadly the reality isn't all sugar plums and sweetness. American soldier Sam Barrett is a self-professed family man and comes from a long line of military personnel and is currently deployed on a peacekeeping mission. The location of his story has been changed for safety, so while I'm not quite sure where he's stationed for this, he describes the current climate as always raining or foggy. And at the time of this filming, yeah, ditto. One night this past February, while retrieving a cache of buried weapons, he and his platoon noticed some lights in the forest that were far away, but close enough to be seen with the naked eye. Sam described it as 10 small lights, all moving erratically. Another member of his group began to hear what sounded like 2 people whispering in a language none of the group could understand. It was very quiet at first, but then it started to gain in frequency until it sounded like they were whispering right next to his ear. Soon, 10 more voices joined in the whispering, but all speaking at the same time. The men began to panic, believing the lights to be a distraction, which was a common tactic used by local enemies, and that they would soon be ambushed. Caleb, a teammate and good friend of Sam's, suddenly started speaking very loudly. It seemed as though he was trying to communicate with his father, who had passed 2 years earlier, and dropped all of his belongings before running towards the lights. Sam assumed that his friend had lost it, or the enemy was playing with their minds. Fearing for Caleb, and worrying he might give up their position, Sam chased after him. Caleb just kept repeating, "I'm coming, father," as he sprinted towards the lights. And as they got closer, the lights got bigger, and Sam found it odd that he couldn't make out any definition in them. There was nobody or nothing behind them, nothing man-made or otherwise. They just looked like lights floating in midair. Caleb was now on his knees with his arms at his sides and directly in front of the lights. He seemed to be in some sort of a trance, and despite Sam's attempts to snap him out of it, he just kept talking to his father and directly to the lights. Eventually, the commander of the team arrived, observing Caleb and then the lights before muttering, "The fairies have him." Oh, Okay, not ominous at all. Caleb eventually passed out and the lights disappeared almost instantly. After being carried back to their base and returning to consciousness, Caleb had zero recollection of what had happened, not only that evening, but the entire day was a blank. Okay, so maybe I don't want to meet a real fairy anymore. In second place, we have a spotting of not deer. Now, I have to say, I was definitely chuckling a bit at first reading about this cryptid friend, seeing as where I'm from, that's just another way to lead into conversation about seeing a moose on the highway. And while the thought of driving with an eyesight of a moose is scary enough, not deer are actually scarier. This report comes from high school student Elias Merritt in Roanoke, Virginia. Describing the time of day as almost dark, he was waiting for his dad to pick him up after a basketball game when he experienced a feeling of something or someone watching him. He turned around suddenly and saw what he described as the shadow of a man behind a bush, which caused him to flee to the other side of the street, hiding in an area where he felt safer but could still see if his ride was arriving. As he stood in this new position, Elias saw two deer along the edge of the woods and watched them as they moved, observing that one of the deer seemed to have a bad back leg or was injured. He walked in their direction to get a better look and see if he could help, but as he got closer, he realized they weren't deer and froze, petrified. The beings had oddly shaped heads and appeared to have patches of hair stitched over human skin. Both of the creatures looked into the direction of Elias and slowly stood up on their back legs and began running towards him, chasing him to the point where he was simply running and yelling in the direction of his home, no longer worried about waiting for his ride. Eventually coming across his dad, he jumped in the vehicle and was so panicked that all he could utter was, "Go, go, 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 go," unable to speak normally. Thankfully, his dad didn't prod, and the boy was able to tell his tale to both of his parents once he calmed down at home. Later that evening, Elias's dad sat down with him and explained that several years ago, he had had a similar experience while hunting in the forests outside of town, with his descriptions of the creatures being almost identical to what Elias had seen. Now, not to sound like a broken record, but I'm really glad I've never been the hiking type. Coming in first place, we have the beast of Bladenboro, over in North Carolina, in the town of, anyone want to guess? You got it. There was a series of animal deaths back in the winter of 1953 to 54 that were highly suspicious, with plenty of skeptics discussing possible predatory animals as the cause, but locals claim it was the fault of a unique predator that still roams the forest to this day and can be spotted anywhere between Bladen Lake State Forest to the Green Swamp Preserve area, which is around 3 counties and 1,225 square miles, making it a fairly sized hunting ground. This spotting in particular takes place in early March, when experienced hunter Zach Kennedy was in the Green Swamp Preserve area when it started getting dark, which is when you have to leave the area in accordance with local law. Making his way through the swamp and bush towards his truck, he heard a strange noise and paused to listen closer, believing it to be a black bear. When he stopped, the unknown being stopped, and when he walked, it also walked. Now, Zach said it made him nervous, no kidding, because whatever it was knew he was there and wouldn't be running off. He said he started making noise and even set off a warning with his personal firearm. Now, unlike an actual bear would, this creature didn't leave, but instead let out a growl. Zach said you could feel as much as hear. A hard pass. When he came out of the woods and onto the dirt road where his pickup was within sight, Zach made the decision to try and run to his truck since whatever it was still following him. Creature soon began running as well, with Zach comparing the sound to a bulldozer crashing through the woods, and when it was out of the woods, it sounded like a horse running through loose dirt. He could hear the stomps of its feet and the growling in its breath, and released another round behind himself, hoping it would scare the being enough to stop for a moment and give Zach a chance to make it to the truck. The creature screamed behind him, and Zach thought the scream came from a human, causing him to turn around and clearly see the creature for the first time. He described it as jet black, as big as a 600-pound black bear, with a tail as long as its body and eyes that were glowing red. Zach bolted the rest of the way to the truck and jumped in, and had barely locked the door before the beast was pressed up against the window, with its breathing fogging up the glass. The creature then moved to the front of the truck, and while standing on all 4 legs, was eye level with Zach in his pickup. It chased Zach as he drove as quickly as he could for quite some time, before eventually stopping and staring as Zach continued his escape. Now, the next day, he and his dad went back and looked around for tracks, red bodily fluids, any evidence at all. He said there was no red fluid to be seen, even though he knows it was, shot, and there were paw prints as big as his hands on the ground everywhere. They then found a tree that had claw marks around an inch deep in the wood and spaced 4 inches apart from each other around 9 feet up. Now, the men didn't venture into the woods, nor did they go too far from the truck, describing the feeling of being hunted and not wanting a repeat of the day before or worse. They got back in the truck to leave and heard a scream that made all of the hair on their body stand straight, deciding then and there to leave and take a hiatus from hunting for this season.
Number 5, Bigfoot. It feels a little strange trying to say anything about Bigfoot because, you know, he's like the most easily recognizable and cited cryptid in North America and maybe all over the world. I find it very interesting how many cultures across the globe have a variation on a giant bipedal ape-like creature. You know, there's the Yeti of the Himalayas, the Australians have the Yowie, and I'm pretty sure about a dozen others. It's a very ancient cryptid, with its origins being difficult to trace back. It's one of our oldest stories as a people, actually. Some of the earliest stories ever come from indigenous tribes telling these stories of giant, hairy, bipedal creatures that would live in the forest. If you've ever wondered where the name Sasquatch comes from, it's an anglicization of Sasquatch, a shape-shifting creature originating from the Thitsales people of Vancouver, described as being a giant ape-like creature that could take the shape of different creatures. Which I guess would kind of explain how the thing is so good at hiding if it's always turning into something else when we're trying to get footage of it. Now, the term Bigfoot came about sometime in the 1950s. Jerry Crew was a lumberjack working in Humboldt County when he discovered a set of large 16-inch footprints sunk deep within the mud of the Six Rivers forest where he was working at the time. He told his coworkers about this odd occurrence, with many of them claiming that they'd seen similar tracks on previous sites, reporting too of various things they couldn't explain, like a 450-pound oil drum going missing in the middle of the night. You know how often that happens, you look one way and then your 450-pound drum is gone. The men gave a name to this mystery creature that they perceived was harassing them and called it Bigfoot on, well, account of the big feet. Sometimes the origin is exactly what you think it's going to be. From here, once a local paper picked it up, the story of Bigfoot spread across the country, referencing this mystery creature leaving tracks in California. It was this, combined with the famous footage in 1972, that cemented Bigfoot as a cryptid with staying power. Now, I'm referring to the Patterson-Gimlin film, named after the filmmakers. You've definitely seen it if you're interested in cryptids at all. It's less than 50 seconds, and it's some of the most famous cryptid footage of all time. It's a very short clip. Everyone recognizes that like classic Bigfoot walk. To date, it's never been officially debunked, and the men who recorded the capture went to their graves insisting there was no hoax present. Now, the existence of Bigfoot is still hotly debated and honestly probably will be forever unless we ever get some concrete proof, unless Bigfoot ever comes out and holds a press conference. Wherever he is or wherever they are, I hope Sasquatches, Yetis, Yowies, Big Feet, I hope they're chillin'. Probably annoying dealing with paparazzi all the time, and you know what? Let them live in peace. If they want to come to us, they'll come to us. And while you're waiting for that Bigfoot press conference to happen, if you're looking for more cryptid content, Top 5 Scary's the place to be. We've got all of that and then some. If cryptids aren't your jam, we got aliens, conspiracies, true crime, fake crime, basically anything scary under the sun and above it. So stay subscribed, don't miss a single scream, but do that after this video, okay? Wait till the credits. Alright, moving on. Number 4, Thunderbird. Our next critter is going to be the Thunderbird. Nope, nothing to do with the sick classic car, although it's a mean ride. The Thunderbird is a creature that appears across many cultures, mostly indigenous groups alongside the Pacific Coast and Great Lakes area, all telling similar stories of these enormous, larger-than-life birds of prey. Now, these vary anywhere from stories of, you know, just like a really big bird that would be scary, or sometimes Thunderbirds are more mythical, capable of impressive powers like thunder striking when they flap their wings, which is why they're called Thunderbird. Thunderbird, Bigfoot, sometimes the name of a cryptid really informs what they do. Tribes would tell stories about Thunderbirds to explain natural occurrences like storms or changes in weather or drought, famine, all those things. It's much easier to blame your problems on a big bird than anything else. Now, although they were thought to be dangerous, Thunderbirds were also seen as a benevolent nature spirit, and they would assist the tribe sometimes in searching of food during periods of famine. So they're not all bad, you know, it's a Thunderbird to Thunderbird case basis. Now, it wouldn't be a good cryptid list unless we had a few sightings instead of just stories. So, we're going to talk about one incident in particular with the Thunderbird, the 1977 Lawndale incident. This occurred when a young boy, one Marlon Lowe, was playing outside when he was attacked by two large birds, one of which allegedly began to carry the boy away, until the boy's mother ran to his rescue. Eyewitnesses who'd seen the incident taking place claimed the birds were 4.5 feet long with a wingspan of 10 feet, which is pretty incredible. A 6-inch hooked bill, 3 sharp claws, and a large black body, not really resembling any local birds. So what was it? Thunderbird coming down to soup up prey? Real life Pokemon? Sounds a bit like a starling. Also, a big shout out to that kid's mom. Imagine that power dynamic. Anytime he's acting up, you can remind him of the time you saved him from getting eaten by a giant bird. Oh, that'll get him mowing the lawn for sure. Number 3, a Chenu. A Chenu is an Algonquin creature of folklore, a bit similar to a Wendigo, but with some fun regional twists. While both creatures hunt hunt in wooded northern areas and are both commonly associated with the wintertime. A Wendigo is usually depicted as a stretched out, emaciated monster, whereas a Chenu is depicted as being massive, very furry, and only getting larger and larger the more it eats. Actually, reading that back now, I realize that's not terribly impressive. Most things get larger and larger as they eat. Much like a Wendigo though, a Chenu is thought to have been formerly a man who was turned into a beast, either through their greedy ways, refusing to feed the starving, or for those who give in to the darkest of temptations and consume human flesh willingly. A Chenu is described as looking like a cross between an old man and a beast, large and imposing in appearance, with big chunks of their own flesh missing, possibly self-inflicted. They cover themselves in the forest, hiding themselves with leaves, bark, snow, pine needles, until they look like a horrible lint roller of the woods that walks upright. Interestingly, unlike a Wendigo, it's thought that the process of turning into a Chenu can actually be reversed. There's some good news. In some folk tales, the way to cure a Chenu is a special medicine that can cause them to vomit up their frozen heart and vomit up the flesh that they've consumed, causing the afflicted to revert back to their human form in a sight that is no doubt disgusting for everybody. But if this isn't possible, if you don't have this medicine on hand, or it's just not feasible to trick a Chenu, you can also get it to eat salt, which will apparently melt it from the inside. Poor Chenu. You're forced to live a tormented existence as a snow monster, isolated from your former friends, doomed to hunt on your former species, consuming only the darkest meat available, and you can't even order a little bit of salt for your dinner, eating a totally flavorless diet. I got nothing but sympathy for you, Chenu. Number 3, Kamataichi. I think it's really fascinating what each culture's cryptids look like, you know? Each culture creates cryptids and they all put their fun little spins on it, and whenever I get to make these videos, I learn all sorts of really cool mythological stuff that I'd never heard of before, and I sincerely hope you get that out of these videos too. I'd never heard of this next one, the Kamataichi, but I am obsessed with it now. Coming to us from Japan, this yokai, which is like a Japanese type of demon, appears like a weasel except with razor sharp sickle-like claws, like a real-life Sneasel from Pokemon. I'm actually amazed there's no Pokemon directly based on a Kamataichi. They seem like perfect for it. They have spiny fur, similar to a hedgehog, like prickly little needles, but they bark like a dog, and their claws could not be any sharper, and they're sickle-shaped. And also, a lot of depictions of them are downright adorable. These funny little creatures are extremely lightweight and have learned how to ride the currents of the wind to travel. They honestly sound kind of like radical in like a California surfer way. The legends of the Kamataichi come out of the Chubu region of Japan, when vicious cold winds were so powerful they would cut people down directly. And these legends would take the form of the spirit called the Kamataichi, which was the winds themselves as this furry little miscreant. It would attack at your legs, causing you to fall down, exposed and helpless, while it sucked at your blood. It's said that no blood occurs from their woundings because of this, as a Kamataichi moves so quickly and sucks it all up. That's almost considerate of it, doesn't leave a stain. These creatures move so quickly, and they're so good at hiding, that they're apparently completely invisible to the naked eye, appearing as nothing more than a sharp, freezing wind on your skin. Amusingly, there's some debate as to whether or not a Kamataichi's true origin is actually nothing more than a silly pun. There's a stance samurai would use called a kamaitachi, translating loosely to sword stance, which would explain, you know, it's a sharp thing. I don't know where the stance comes in, but it's sharp. However, there are legends all throughout Japan, throughout many regions, all telling stories of creatures that ride the wind and attack humans, and the sickle weasel remains among the most popular and among the most adorable. Sorry, Kamataichi, you are just so cute. If anybody knows where to get like a stuffed toy of this little guy, please comment under the video. I need to know. Number 1, the Yeti. Coming in at the number 1 spot, a mainstay of any trip to the mountain, the Yeti. I mean, who else could possibly take the number 1 spot on a list about winter cryptids? Maybe Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Does he count as a cryptid? I guess he was. Maybe he's more like a mutant. Anyway, a Yeti is an American manufacturer specializing in outdoor products such as ice coolers, vacuum insulated drinkware, and I'm reading the wrong one. Sorry. Let's do that again. A Yeti refers to an ape-like creature thought to live in the mountains in the Himalayas, standing upright like a man and walking on 2 legs, and is usually pretty big, like 8 feet tall, with long arms, broad feet, and long brownish hair and sunken eyes. It kind of sounded a bit like me, to be honest. While it's pretty common to draw a Yeti as just being like a big giant white gorilla, they're actually pretty different, and most traditional depictions of a Yeti color it with darker fur. They're probably one of the oldest cryptids out there that's still talked about so fondly, with stories of Yetis going all the way back to 326 BC, when Alexander the Great sought out to capture one to see for himself while he was conquering the Indus Valley, although he was told that no Yeti could survive at an altitude low enough to meet meet him. And Alexander wept, for there were no more Yetis left to conquer. It's got several names. It's sometimes called a Sasquatch, or in the West, it's popularly referred to as an abominable snowman, although that's a term by British officers who were stationed in the Himalayas, as no natives to the regions call it that. The name Yeti possibly comes from the Tibetan words Yete, meaning a man-like animal, or from Meti, meaning bear in some Nepalese and Tibetan dialects, which would make a good bit of sense, as it's thought that a number of Yeti sightings over the years that led to it being such a widely recognized cryptid could actually just be bear sightings being mistaken in the frosty air. In fact, there's a theory that Yeti sightings are from hybrid polar bears that had bred with grizzly bears, which has been recorded to happen, just not really anywhere where Yeti sightings are really made, so kinda up in the air. In Sherpa tradition, it's said that a Yeti is a powerful, mystical being, and a Yeti can choose to whom it will make itself visible to, choosing to only appear to those who believe in it. So if you're ever trekking the Himalayas and worried about an attack, here's a little advice for you: just don't believe in it. Although there are a good number of people who believe that the Yeti are an intelligent enough species that just want to be left alone to their own devices, living peacefully in the mountains. Not so abominable after all. Number 5. The Dover Demon. Starting off on our list is the cutest cryptid on this list in my opinion, but still a creepy little freak. I like to start with the cute ones to kind of ease you into it. The Dover Demon first appeared in Massachusetts in the town of Dover, lending it its name. It appears as a spindly little demon kind of looking thing that sort of resembles a little gray, the traditional big-eyed aliens that you see everywhere. The Dover Demon is identified by its blank face, its red glowing eyes, and its hunched quadruped stature. The Dover Demon was first recorded in the late 1970s, discovered by 3 teenagers who were driving through Mass when they saw something bizarre being lit up by their headlights. Initially, they didn't think too much of it until they noticed that the creature in front of them looked more like a human than it did an animal. The driver, one Bill Bartlett, described the creature as resembling a baby with elongated arms, tan, sandpaper-like skin, which was coarse looking, and no nose, ears, or mouth to speak of on its bulbous, enlarged head. Bartlett claims that he only got a good look at it for a few seconds before it vanished off into the night. Now, there are some who speculate that the Dover Demon is capable of rendering itself invisible, or camouflaging itself because of the description of this story, and that during daylight it prefers to hide itself in the trees of Dover. Now, bizarrely, I think some skeptics write off the Dover Demon by claiming it was just a baby moose being seen at an odd angle or under strange conditions. And I don't know if I really buy that. I've never seen a baby moose at night in headlights, but I have seen a baby moose. They would have a bulbous head or front-facing eyes, and a baby moose doesn't have that, so I don't know if it's all that. A more pressing question, I think, is if the Dover Demon is a cryptid, or perhaps a visitor from another planet, because it does look a lot like the descriptions of the little grays. Now there's a bigger philosophical question there. Are aliens cryptid? Let me know about that in the comments below. And if you like hearing stories about cryptids and aliens, well, I have some great news, my friend. We got loads of cryptid videos on the channel, so get comfy, click through the playlists, and stay subscribed for something new every day. Number 4. Goatman. Up next on our list of cryptids that'll keep you from sleeping is Maryland's own Goatman. Now, he might look like Mr. Tumnus, but he isn't going to take you to Narnia anytime soon, and there'll be no Turkish delight in your future. Appearing as a half-human, satiric hybrid, the Goatman is thought to roam around Maryland, but he's been sighted in Louisiana and Texas as well. You know, perhaps he gets bored, perhaps he was taking a tour. The Goatman is said to carry a hatchet with him, and not for hacking any lumber. He's been said to be responsible for missing animals around the wooded areas in Maryland. Now, there's a pretty good historical precedent for goats involved in mythology, with satyrs as a mythical historical cryptid, and goats have been associated with Satan and demons for generations. But the Goatman himself has got a pretty rich history in Maryland folklore. Depending on who you ask, he's either just a cryptid goat man who wanders the woods, or if that's not satisfying enough for you, one particularly colorful origin for the goat man is that it's the product of a mad scientist's experiment who was experimenting with goats, and when it went astray, the goat man broke loose and started attacking passersby with an axe. I really like this one, and I choose to believe it's 100% factual. The goat man is a pretty popular folk story with teenagers, with urban legends describing the beast hunting down those who are looking to spend a little quality time at Lover's Lane. It said he'll come and bleat ya. Bleat, like beat. It's a goat pun. It was pretty bad. Do goats do that, or is this sheep? I'm not sure. You know what? I shouldn't be practicing here. We're gonna move on from this. The Goatman still hasn't been seen as much in recent years, and I sincerely hope that he's still out there. Number 3, Accor Camu. One of my favorite genres of cryptid or mythical creature is just a regular animal, but big. I mean, that's what the Thunderbird was. Maybe that's evident because the last 2 creatures that I spoke of on this list was a big ape and a big bird, respectively. Can we keep that trend going? Of course. Now, this list has been a little North American centric so far, so our next entry is going to be the Accor Camu, a Japanese cryptid that is basically just a giant octopus. They don't all have to have powers, they don't all have to be complicated, sometimes you can summarize them just like that. It's sort of like the Japanese equivalent to the Kraken, the other really big name in the giant octopi scene. The Accor Camu is a giant octopus god that is said to reside in Hokkaido's Uchira Bay. It's said to be big enough to swallow a ship whole. Its crimson body turns the sky and water red when it swims through. Old fishermen used to tell stories that when the seas or skies would turn red, that meant the Accor Camu was there and you should just avoid that general area. The fishing's gonna be no good. You're gonna get eaten by a giant octopus. Now, the origin of this legend is the best part of this cryptid. He's got some great lore. The legends state that near the mountains near the village of Rebungi, there lived a gigantic spider by the name of Yaushika. His gigantic red body stretched over the mountains. One day, he descended, he was feeling frisky, and attacked the people in the village of Rebungi. He shook the earth as he walked, destroying everything in his path. Now, the villagers were terrified of him because he's a giant spider, and prayed to their gods to save him. The god of the sea, Repun Kami, heard the prayers and pulled the giant spider into the sea, where its body was contorted and twisted into the shape of the Accor Camu, the monstrous octopus. Started as a spider, ended as an octopus. That's an icky way to live. That guy's just always been icky. Number 2, Bunyip. Coming in at the number 2 spot for today is going to be the Bunyip, which from the name alone, you might be forgiven for thinking it sounds kind of cute. You know, you close your eyes, Bunyip. That almost sounds like it's wanting to be an adorable little rabbit Pokemon or something. If only. Also, there's a lot of Pokemon references in this video. I got it on the brain, clearly. Gotta catch them all. I think I'm just sad because Ash and Pikachu retired. Anyway, the Bunyip is a creature from Aboriginal Australian folklore. Its name literally means devil or evil spirit, translated from the Wemba Wemba language. The Bunyip is an aquatic predator with many varying descriptions. Sometimes it's described as kind of looking like a hippo, sometimes it looks like a cross between like a cat dog, and sometimes it's just an incomprehensible, scary, snake-like twisty monster thing. All that's common across all of these depictions is that it's a scary thing that lives in the water. Over the years, there have been a number of reported sightings or findings of mysterious bones in southern Australia that led early settlers and colonists to believe that the Bunyip was a new creature out waiting to be discovered. It inhabits swamps, rivers, and lakes, lurking for prey. Now, the first recorded sighting of it by Australian settlers can be traced back to 1851, when a tracing of the creature's body was discovered near a riverbank in Ararat, Victoria. Local hunters had speared an unknown beast and made an imprint of the creature's body to remember it by, because, you know, if you found something weird, you'd want to remember it. They described it as 11 paces long and 4 paces wide in an extreme depth. Now, sadly, this outline no longer exists. They didn't use permanent marker, but it was enough to spur an interest and a hunt for this possibly mythical, possibly real creature. The Bunyip seems like it could have been a real strange step in aquatic evolution. Could not even begin to guess what it was really, or whatever it was they had found that day, so probably just safe for us to assume that it was a cryptid and there could be more Bunyip out there lurking and waiting. At number 1, Ogo Pogo. Coming in at the number 1 spot is going to be a local favorite of ours, Canada's very own Ogo Pogo. Yes, I'm a little biased. I had to include a local cryptid at the end of this one. Much like Bigfoot, almost every culture's folklore includes some variant of a sea monster. The most famous among them is probably the Loch Ness Monster, the fabled plesiosaur that lives deep beneath Loch Ness in Scotland. Ogo Pogo is kind of like the Canadian version of that. Ogo Pogo chills up in Kelowna, British Columbia, and is tied deeply to the native folklore surrounding this area. The Okanagan natives revered a creature they called the Nataika, or Nahatik, which translates to a few things, but all come out meaning roughly the same thing, you know? Water demon, water god, sacred creature of the water. If you're not getting this across, important thing that's wet. Nataka was a demanding lake god, and it was thought that in order to ensure safe passage, locals would have to sacrifice a small animal, a pig, a chicken, and others, into the lake to appease the hungry lake monster. The threat of a lake monster dragging victims to the bottom really kept people in line. Now, it should be worth noting that there is some good evidence evidence and a bit of pushback from native groups to suggest that the demonic view of the lake spirit actually came from European settlers, and that to the Okanagan people, the Nahatiko was a fairly benign spirit that actually protected the valley and was kind of a cool guy. Now, all those names, where does it eventually become Ogo Pogo? The rather silly sounding name sounds more like it's a toy. Well, a children's song from the 1930s was the first place to ever refer to this sea creature as Ogo Pogo, describing it in the lyrics as, his mother was an earwig, father was a whale, a little bit of head, hardly in a tail, and Ogo Pogo was his name. That's as much singing as you're ever getting out of me. Over the years, much like Nessie, there have been numerous possible sightings of Ogo Pogo seeing something strange in the water that can't always be easily explained. Many people believe that Ogo Pogo could be like an otter or a seal or something that's always getting misattributed, but the legend is very much alive. Ogo Pogo has become a bit of a mascot for the city of Kelowna, with the statue of it serving as a popular photo op for tourists. So please, if you're ever in the area, snap a pic with Ogo Pogo. He loves it, he loves the press, and you don't even have to sacrifice a chicken to him anymore. Number 5, Moth Man. We had to start with a classic. He was either going to be number 5 or number 1, and I figured we'd get him out of the way first. He's maybe one of the most universally recognized and classic cryptids out there. He's West Virginia's unofficial mascot, and he's as beloved as the Appalachians and buckwheat pancakes. You've probably heard of Mothman a bunch before, but do you know his backstory? You know where his legends and his legacies start? Unless you're a West Virginia native, maybe not, so let's shed some light on the Mothman, because he would probably love that. You know, he's a moth, he's drawn to it. Most Mothman fans agree that his first reported sighting was in the 1960s, 1966 to be exact. The story goes that a young couple, one Roger and Linda Scarberry, had been driving around at night when they saw a large creature whose eyes were glowing red, standing at the side of the road near the site of an old World War II munitions plant. Linda described this being as being 7 foot tall, muscular, with giant wings and nightmarish glowing red eyes. Upon being illuminated, the creature pursued them all the way to Point Pleasant. Now, one isolated sighting does not make a cryptid legend, so it was probably the repeated sightings that propelled our favorite moth into legend status. For the next few weeks, Virginians kept reporting sightings of a bizarre, large, bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. On December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge in West Virginia collapsed, with several locals conspiring that the Mothman was involved, and could be seen flying away from the crime scene. I always thought he was benevolent, just like a fun, I don't know, guy. I didn't know he did stuff like that. This is unwelcome news. Maybe it's just because we all like the idea of him so much. He does look weirdly cuddly, but Mothman is an absolutely beloved figure to West Virginia and cryptid fans all over. He's kind of larger than life, and it's easy to forget that the first initial sightings and reports of him was that he was a paranormal threat intent on harming humans, considering just how adorable he is now. He's got movies, stuffed toys, and even a festival in his hometown dedicated to celebrating our favorite freak. And if you're looking for more stories of freaks of nature, or the nature of freaks, stories too good to be true and stories too true to be good, well, we've got all of that and then some on Top 5 Scary. Click through, I guarantee you'll find something you like, and then subscribe and stay scared if you do. But hey, keep watching this video first, because we got way more cryptids to get through before we hit the credits. Let's keep going. Number 4, the Rugaru. Oh, that is so fun to say. Say that at home with me around. Rugaru. Oh, rolls off the tongue. Our next entry takes us deep into the swamps of Louisiana. Deep beneath the brush of the bayou, amidst all the flies, crawfish, toads, and gators, lies something sinister in the sunshiny Pelican State. Alright, I'll knock that off. I won't do that for the rest of the video. I won't torture you. The Rugaru is a centuries-old cryptid, a more Cajun answer to the werewolf. The name Rugaru actually is a direct link from the French word for werewolf, loup-garou, shifting over time. If you L to an R if you can hear it there, I don't know. My accent's not great. The history of the Rugaru can vary greatly, with differing legends and conflicting fables telling different stories of the beast's origins or motives, but it can all be traced all the way back to medieval France. Back in those days, a lot could go wrong. Lost crops, your livestock goes missing, your children go missing, your house burns down, all your investments in cryptocurrency go up in smoke, and all your apes get stolen. Any number of terrible things could happen to a French medieval peasant. And when that would happen, instead of cursing out or lashing out at the sky, you would blame the Rugaru for your troubles. It's very easy to pin all your problems on an imaginary werewolf. I do that all the time. I stub my toe, I curse out a werewolf. Villages would capture people who they believed to be acting strangely, or even sometimes just somebody who lived out in the woods and pin all the blame on the village's problems on them for being a werewolf. So unfair the discrimination werewolves receive. This tradition of blaming an invisible werewolf for your problems led to the Rugaru becoming a fixture in legends passed down from French Catholics, mostly about behaving. Stories would be told of how if you didn't behave, you didn't follow your parents' rules, the Rugaru would come and he'd snatch you from your bed in the middle of the night and carry you off in the woods. Or sometimes he's like a very Catholic monster. If you didn't adhere to the rules of Lent every year, your sinful ways would see you transforming into a Rugaru. So it's a Catholic werewolf born out of naughty behavior instead of being bit by one. How exactly someone like transforms into a Rugaru is not made super clear, like if it only happens on full moons or if it's a one and done kind of thing and then you're a furry for life. All that's known is that the Rugaru is a deadly creature of the night, stalking the swamps, giving pause to travelers who dare explore the bayou late at night. But hey, so long as you mind your P's and Q's and you promise to give up whatever you said you would for Lent, you and the Rugaru should be headed in different directions. Hopefully. Number 3. Qulapalic. The Qulapalic, or the Qulapalic, is an indigenous cryptid, with most stories emanating from Nunavut, Canada, and Alaska in the United States. The Qulapalic is described as appearing vaguely humanoid, but having scaly and bumpy skin, and long, stringy, disgusting black hair. They are described as being disgustingly ugly and that they reek of sulfur, and I think it's worth noting that you cannot find a single artist's depiction of these things that don't make them just look like vomitatiously gross. Interestingly, the creature is predominantly described as being a female monster, although some local variations of the stories exist where it is described as a male creature, but most tales revolving it describe it as a lady monster. The Qulapalic is a bit of an icy boogeyman, snatching up children who misbehave, waiting around thin ice to crack up and drag those children down into freezing cold water. It's thought that the origin of this creature was first told as a story for practical purposes, as a pretty good way to get kids to not walk on thin ice is to tell them that they'll be grabbed by a gross ice demon. Allegedly, when they grab a child, they stuff them inside their leather burlap sacks, then scurry back downwards into the water. It's said that you can hear a knocking under the ice as a last warning that they're about to strike. Now maybe this is just a personal experience I had, and maybe some of you also had this as a little kid, but I was read a children's book called A Promise is a Promise, a Robert Munsch classic, that featured a Qulapalic as a villain that was trying to get a little girl to bring her younger siblings to the Qulapalic as a little snack, and it terrified me so much. I didn't even live anywhere near thin ice and I was scared about it. It scared me bad. Wiry black hair and sunken little eyes got me. Maybe it's not relatable at all, but I thought I would share that. I definitely didn't spend any time near thin ice afterwards. Number 2, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a fairly popular cryptid and has been subject to all sorts of sightings and stories since the early 1700s. And I bet you can't guess where it usually shows up. That's right. California. Nope, New Jersey. The Jersey Devil is commonly described as manifesting itself as a chimeric creature with a horse's head, bat wings, a snake-like tail, and hooves. There's an interesting folktale that says that the Jersey Devil was brought into our world when a woman was stressed out over her 13th pregnancy. Good lord, yeah, I would be too at my 13th pregnancy. Okay. She was nervous because apparently this pregnancy felt different, and I guess if she had 12 others, she'd really know. She said that she felt like the baby that was inside her was the devil. When she was ready to deliver her little newborn, instead of a happy little baby, the Jersey Devil was born, flew out into the night, and then spent the next 250 years terrorizing the New Jersey swampland. The creature is deeply rooted in local folklore, and to be honest, it's kind of beloved around Jersey. It serves as the name for the New Jersey Devils, and it worms its way into all sorts of pop culture, games, movies, TV, music. They love them over there. For years, there have been stories and sightings around New Jersey describing a kangaroo-like creature with glowing red eyes hunting on small animals in the surrounding areas, and lots of blurry photos of bizarre hybrid-looking creatures running around the countryside. There have even been hunts and bounties posted for the Jersey Devil with rewards for its capture. So is the Jersey Devil real, or just a beloved local legend? Number 1, the Hat Man. Rounding off our list is our most recent cryptid on this list, and a piece of modern folklore that is already making a lasting legacy. The Hat Man is a shadow person, or at least thought to be. Everyone who's seen the Hat Man has described almost the same thing exactly, most concerningly. A spindly, shadowy figure that appears to be wearing a hat. Sometimes a fedora, sometimes a top hat, but everyone describes him as wearing an old, out-of-date style, so you're not going to see him in a shadowy snapback anytime soon. He always appears fairly towering, and you can't see his face. It's obscured, or just not present, and the only thing you're truly able to make out are his pinprick red eyes poking out of the shadows watching you. Depending on who you ask based on the sightings, the Hat Man can be considered somewhat benign. Maybe. It's usually reported that the Hat Man appears to people who are suffering from sleep paralysis or insomnia, and most claims of Hat Man describe him as just watching, observing, studying, or whatever. I honestly don't know if that's better than attacking you. However, it's not all just stories of nighttime stalking. There are some who claim that when they've been visited by the Hat Man, that he's jumped them or choked them, or they've felt burning sensations on their scalps or their chest. Although some say he's just watching you for I don't want to know why. There are many who believe that he feeds off your negative emotions, and perhaps this is how he satiates himself. It's said that people who are visited by Hat Man are those who are already struggling with something emotionally resonating. Sometimes people in the same family even report seeing the Hat Man in similar occurrences, so does he target specific groups of people? Or is it just certain emotions he hungers for? The Hat Man is shrouded in mystery, and even just thinking about him is enough to make my hair stand on end and start eyeing the coat rack in my room just a little suspiciously when I turn the lights off.